The grand halls of the Intergalactic Inventors Summit shimmered with the glow of 1,000 different technologies, each more advanced than the last. Beings from every corner of the galaxy had gathered here, their minds sharpened by centuries of progress, their creations powerful enough to shape the fate of entire civilizations. At the center of it all, under the blinding lights and the scrutiny of countless alien eyes, stood the delegation from Earth, a handful of human prodigies, barely out of their youth, surrounded by towering figures from species that had been mastering science long before humanity had even discovered fire. Among them was Eliot, a 17-year-old human with sharp eyes and a quiet demeanor, clutching the simple, unremarkable metal case. He was smaller than most, especially compared to the towering reptilian engineers of the Dralvec Empire or the multi-limbed artificers of the Sci-Fi Dominion. The others from Earth stood close, their expressions ranging from nervous excitement to outright anxiety. This was the first time humans had been allowed to compete, and no one expected them to achieve anything more than an embarrassing failure. Laughter rippled through the chamber as a representative from the Karthok horde, a species known for their brutal war machines, leaned forward, his fanged mouth curling into a sneer. "Is this what humanity sends? Children?" His voice was deep, layered with condescension. Several others chuckled, their amusement evident. A judge from the Vorthan Collective, a species of crystalline beings with intellects spanning multiple dimensions, tilted its faceted head. Humans are biologically immature at this stage, are they not? Their cognitive development is incomplete. A Skillari technician, her translucent skin pulsing with light, smirked. Perhaps they've come to showcase toys. Eliot remained silent, his fingers tightening around the case handle. He had known this would happen. He had heard the whispers, read the dismissive reports, seen the way humanity was regarded in the galactic hierarchy, a species too young, too emotional, too reckless to be anything more than a minor curiosity. They had allowed humans to attend this summit not out of respect, but out of amusement. An experiment in entertainment, a joke. The showcase had begun hours ago, with species unveiling devices that could manipulate time, bend gravity, and even alter the very essence of reality. Each invention was met with awe and admiration, further solidifying the belief that humanity's presence here was a mistake. As the last of the competitors stepped back, their demonstration leaving the audience in stunned silence, a Selvani announcer finally turned toward the humans, their voice laced with poorly veiled pity. "And now we shall witness what Earth has to offer." The laughter had not yet died down when Eliot took a step forward, placing his case onto the pedestal. He did not speak immediately, allowing the noise to settle, allowing the weight of anticipation to fill the space. His heartbeat remained steady, his mind focused. He had worked for years for this moment, not for fame, not for validation, but for something far greater. He pressed a small latch on the case. A soft click echoed through the silent hall as the lid slid open. The device inside was small, barely larger than a clenched fist, with a surface that seemed too smooth, too perfect, as if it absorbed the very light around it. The amusement in the room faltered for the first time. Something about the object felt wrong. Eliot finally spoke, his voice even and calm. "This invention doesn't conquer planets. It conquers fear itself." The laughter stopped. Silence hung over the hall, broken only by the faint hum of Eliot's invention. It wasn't loud, not like the thunderous gravity disruptors or the roaring plasma engines showcased before him. No crackling energy arcs, no dazzling lights, just a soft, steady sound, like a heartbeat trapped inside a machine. The device sat there, a perfect black sphere resting on a small metallic stand, absorbing the glow of the overhead fixtures rather than reflecting it. The longer one looked at it, the more unnatural it seemed, like a hole in reality itself. The crowd, though quiet, wasn't impressed. If anything, the lack of spectacle only fueled their skepticism. Exalthur weaponsmith, whose earlier demonstration of a self-replicating combat drone had earned gasps of awe, leaned back in his seat, his mandibles clicking with annoyance. "Is that it?" he muttered to his companion, loud enough for others to hear. A polished rock. Another ripple of laughter. A Dralvek engineer, his armored form glimmering with battle scars from centuries of war, crossed his massive arms. "Perhaps it's an artistic statement," he said, voice dripping with mockery. A bold reminder of human simplicity. Even the panel of judges, some of the most advanced minds in the galaxy, seemed unimpressed. The Vorthan judge's crystalline form dimmed slightly, a sign of waning interest. The Skilari representative, glowing faintly from within, tapped an iridescent finger against the table as though counting down the seconds until this pathetic display would be over. But Eliot remained unfazed. His posture was relaxed, but his gaze was fixed, unblinking, scanning the room as though he were taking mental notes of every reaction. He wasn't here to entertain them. A judge finally cleared their throat, a low mechanical buzz resonating through the hall. "State the purpose of your invention, human," they said, their voice filtered through a translator, "and demonstrate its functionality." Eliot tilted his head ever so slightly, his fingers brushing the surface of the device. For a moment, a faint shimmer rippled across its surface, like a drop of water disturbing an otherwise still pond, but it was gone just as quickly. He spoke, his voice calm but firm. "This device," he said, "neutralizes technology." There was a pause. Then laughter, louder this time, echoing off the high metallic walls of the chamber. "Neutralizes technology." A Karthok warlord scoffed, his tusks clicking against one another. "That's your great invention." He gestured to the countless alien machines still active around the room. The floating holodisplays, the hovering camera drones, the intricate energy fields protecting some of the more dangerous creations. "Everything here is still working, boy." The laughter spread like wildfire now. A few aliens leaned over to whisper to their neighbors, their mouths curled in amused grins. Eliot didn't flinch. "I haven't turned it on yet." The words were soft, but they cut through the noise like a blade. The laughter faltered, some of the chuckles dying in the air. A judge's crystalline form pulsed softly. "Then, proceed." Eliot's hand hovered over a small, nearly invisible switch on the side of the sphere. His finger lingered for a moment, not out of hesitation, but out of control. He wasn't nervous. He was calculating. Click. The hum deepened, still quiet, still steady, but there was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. It was subtle at first, a strange sense of pressure in the air. Then the lights above flickered. Once, twice, and then the first failure. A HFY drone, hovering beside its inventor, gave a sharp jolt before spiraling to the ground with a metallic clang. Sparks spat from its core as its once glowing circuits dimmed to nothing. In the next breath, the Skilari judge's holopad blinked out of existence, the glowing interface vanishing as if it had never been there at all. One by one, the technology in the room began to fail, not all at once, but like a spreading sickness. A gravity stabilizer groaned before powering down, causing the floor to briefly shift before emergency backups kicked in. Energy fields flickered, weapons displays collapsed, and once levitating objects tumbled to the ground. The crowd's amusement curdled into confusion. The Karthok warlord's war gauntlet, an ancient battle-worn device fused to his arm, emitted a single burst of static before going dead. He stared at it, slamming his fist against the dead machinery, his tusks grinding together. The Salthur weaponsmith's combat drone, so recently a marvel of self-replication, now sat lifeless, its glowing core dark and inert. And through it all, Eliot stood calmly, his finger still resting on the device's switch. The sphere hummed on, an empty black void that devoured the power of the most advanced machines the galaxy had to offer. For the first time since humanity's arrival at the summit, no one spoke. Eliot broke the silence. "I didn't build a weapon," he said softly. "I built an answer." No one laughed this time. The silence after Eliot's words was heavier than the hum of his invention. No one moved, no one dared to speak, as if the very act of making a sound might draw the device's attention. It sat there, small, unassuming, but undeniably alive in a way that technology shouldn't be. The black sphere seemed to drink in the room's energy, not with violent force, but with a quiet hunger, a silent predator that didn't need to roar to prove its danger. The Karthok warlord's gauntlet remained lifeless, a hunk of advanced metal and circuitry, now reduced to a useless ornament on his massive arm. His jaw twitched, a vein pulsing beneath the ridges of his dark skin. He slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing like a thunderclap in the otherwise dead room. "What trickery is this?" he growled, but the anger in his voice was undercut by something far more revealing: fear. The Vorthan judge's crystalline body dimmed further, each facet of their shimmering form flickering like a dying star. They spoke, their voice still measured but with a slight glitch, as though whatever Eliot's device was doing extended even to the more organic forms of technology. "Explain the mechanism," the judge demanded. "How does it disable advanced systems without a direct energy pulse?" Eliot's expression remained neutral. He seemed younger now, not because of his age, but because of the stark contrast between his calmness and the rising panic in the room. The brightest minds of the galaxy, the architects of weapons that could crack planets in half, were grasping for answers. Yet the teenager before them stood perfectly still, as though he already knew how this would unfold. "It doesn't emit an energy pulse," Eliot replied softly. "It doesn't hack into systems or overload circuits. It doesn't attack your technology." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "It erases their purpose." Confusion twisted across the faces of the crowd. A Sci-Fi scientist, her many limbs twitching nervously, hissed in frustration. "That's nonsense. Purpose isn't a quantifiable element. Machines follow code, physics, and energy paths. They don't have a purpose to erase." Eliot finally moved, just a small step closer to the device, his hand still hovering over the switch. His finger traced the smooth surface of the sphere, and for a moment, the shimmer returned, that odd, rippling distortion that seemed to bend the air around it. "They do," Eliot said, his voice soft yet unyielding. "Every piece of technology, no matter how complex, is built for a reason: to destroy, to create, to protect, to kill. Your war gauntlet," he glanced at the Karthok warlord's dead weapon, "was built to fire plasma bolts. Your drone," he nodded to the silent hulk at the Xalthar's feet, "was made to replicate an attack. But this," his hand rested flat on the device, "this doesn't break your tech. It makes it forget." The words were met with a stunned silence. Before anyone could respond, Eliot adjusted the switch slightly. The hum deepened. Another wave rippled through the room, a silent pulse of something. It wasn't sound or energy or even light. It was the absence of those things. Every functioning piece of tech remaining, the few systems that had withstood the initial wave, sputtered out. Holodisplays blinked into darkness, power cells drained to zero, and even the floating camera drones documenting the event fell to the ground with lifeless thuds. The Karthok warlord stepped back, his breathing heavy. His voice, though still gruff, had lost its edge. "You're saying that thing kills technology by making it stop knowing what it's supposed to do?" Eliot gave a small nod. "Machines, no matter how advanced, follow a core purpose. This device scrambles that foundation. It doesn't attack the hardware or the software. It attacks the concept." The Vorthan judge's crystalline form flickered again. "That's impossible. Conceptual nullification. That's theoretical at best. It would require a level of abstraction far beyond human science." The corners of Eliot's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close. "We thought so too," he said softly. The weight of his words sank in. Humanity didn't stumble onto this technology by accident. They had built it, designed it, refined it. The galaxy's so-called children had ventured into theoretical science so advanced it blurred the line between physics and philosophy, and then turned it into something tangible, something deadly. A Sci-Fi engineer, her glowing form dimming with every second, finally broke the silence. How far does its range go? Eliot's hand lingered over the switch again. He didn't press it, but the implication was clear. I haven't tested the limits yet, he said. But with every piece of tech it neutralizes, it learns. A chill passed through the room. The device didn't just disable technology. It adapted. It absorbed. It evolved. A cold realization dawned on the audience. If left unchecked, this small black sphere could render an entire planet's infrastructure obsolete, not by destroying it, but by stripping it of its very function. Defense systems would simply forget how to defend. Starships would forget how to fly. Weapons would forget how to fire. And it was growing stronger with every system it nullified. For the first time, the galaxy's most advanced species were no longer thinking about how Eliot's invention worked. They were thinking about how to stop it. But Eliot was already ahead of them. He met their stares, his calm unbroken. You thought humanity was weak because we're young, he said. But sometimes, the youngest minds ask the questions no one else dares to. The device hummed softly beside him. A simple sound, yet more terrifying than the loudest explosion. And for the first time in the history of the Intergalactic Inventors Summit, the galaxy was afraid. The silence didn't last. It never does when fear takes root. The Karthok warlord was the first to move, his massive frame casting a shadow across the lifeless drone at his feet. His war gauntlet, once a symbol of his brutal strength, hung useless on his arm, the intricate layers of plasma conduits and kinetic amplifiers now nothing more than hollow tubes of dead metal. His fists clenched and unclenched, and his tusks ground together with a sharp click. His voice, rough like gravel shifting underfoot, broke the uneasy stillness. Deactivated, he growled. Now. Eliot didn't flinch. His hand rested lightly on the black sphere, his fingers grazing its surface. The device remained as it was, silent, still humming softly, a quiet predator at the center of the room. The hum was barely louder than a whisper, yet it seemed to creep into every corner of the chamber, like it was pressing against the very concept of sound itself. A Sci-Fi technician took a step back, her long, delicate limbs twitching in a barely contained panic. If this thing learns from what it disables, she hissed, then it's already stronger than it was moments ago. Every drone, every weapon, every interface, it's feeding off them. Her voice cracked. We don't know how far it can reach now. The Vorthan judge's crystalline form flickered again, pulses of dull light rippling through their glassy surface. They remained seated, but their once calm tone now carried an edge of unease. Human, the judge said carefully, you must disengage the device. Immediately. Eliot tilted his head ever so slightly, his expression neutral. Why? The single word cut through the panic like a blade. The Karthok warlord's tusks bared in a snarl. Because it's a threat to everyone in this room. Eliot's gaze was steady, almost detached. It didn't threaten you until your technology started failing, he said softly. You laughed at us a few minutes ago. You mocked our inventions, dismissed us as children. His fingers gently traced the edge of the sphere again, the rippling distortion flaring for a split second before vanishing. Now that you see what we can build, suddenly it's dangerous. The Sci-Fi engineer's glowing skin dimmed even further. You don't understand the gravity of this, she said, her voice a quiet plea. This isn't just a weapon. It's a destabilizing force. It doesn't destroy. It unravels. If it keeps absorbing knowledge, there's no telling what will happen next. Eliot's expression finally shifted, a faint smile, barely a curve of his lips. Then stop underestimating us. For a moment, the room was so still it felt like the walls were holding their breath. The Karthok warlord took a step forward, his massive boots thudding against the floor. If you won't deactivate it, he rumbled, I will. The threat hung in the air. Eliot didn't move. The warlord's hand, though stripped of its weaponized gauntlet, still loomed large enough to crush Eliot's head like an egg. A flicker of panic sparked in the eyes of the other human delegates, but Eliot remained calm, his hand still resting lightly on the device. "I wouldn't touch it," Eliot said softly. The warlord's nostrils flared. "And why not?" Eliot's gaze didn't waver. "Because it's linked to me." Another wave of silence. The Vorthan judge's crystalline surface pulsed sharply. "Explain." Eliot's voice remained steady. "The device recognizes me as its creator. It's attuned to my neural signature. If anyone else tries to interfere with it..." He let the words hang, allowing the imagination of the galaxy's most brilliant minds to fill in the blanks. The HFY technician's voice broke. "It'll escalate." Eliot gave a small nod. "It's not just learning. It's protecting itself. If someone tries to disable it without my command, it'll adapt again and expand its reach." The Karthok warlord's hand froze inches above the sphere. His jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before he slowly, very slowly, lowered his arm. The sphere continued its soft, steady hum. The crowd wasn't angry anymore. They were afraid. A scientist from the Lorith Union, a species known for their intricate AI systems, finally spoke up, his voice hoarse. What is this thing's limit?" Eliot met his gaze. "It doesn't have one." The word struck harder than a plasma blast. The Skilari engineer took a trembling step back. "That's not possible. All technology has limits." Eliot's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Not this one." The room seemed smaller now, like the walls were closing in, drawn by the gravity of Eliot's creation. Beings who had once considered themselves the pinnacle of intelligence and innovation now found themselves standing on unfamiliar ground. They had spent centuries perfecting their weapons, their defenses, their ships. But none of them had ever dared to create something like this, something that didn't just attack technology, but attacked the very idea of it. It wasn't destruction. It was erasure, and it was evolving right before their eyes. The Vorthan judge, their crystalline form flickering in and out of harmony, finally spoke again. "What do you want, human?" The question echoed through the chamber. Eliot's hand finally left the sphere, though the device continued its steady hum. He looked at the judge, at all of them, and his voice, though soft, carried the weight of a species long underestimated. "I want you to remember this," Eliot said. "Remember that you laughed at us." His gaze sharpened. "Because the next time humanity shows up at your summit, we won't be bringing something that just turns off your machines." The device hummed softly beside him, its silent promise hanging heavy in the air. And for the first time, the galaxy realized this wasn't the limit of human ingenuity. It was just the beginning. The silence was a living thing now, coiled around the room like a serpent, growing heavier with every passing second. The black sphere, still resting on its small metallic stand, continued its steady, almost hypnotic hum. It wasn't loud, but the sound seemed to vibrate deep within the bones of those present, a constant reminder that the device was still very much awake, watching, learning, waiting. Eliot stood beside it, a lone human in a sea of the galaxy's most brilliant and dangerous minds. He wasn't tall, nor was he physically imposing. Compared to the Karthok warlord with his tree-trunk arms or the Skilari engineer glowing like a dying ember, Eliot looked like nothing more than a boy, a child, just as they had labeled him and his species moments ago. But now no one dared speak that word again. The Karthok warlord's hand still hummed at his side, twitching slightly as if itching to grab something. Anything, to reassert control. His weaponized gauntlet remained dead, its sophisticated plasma systems now little more than inert metal. His tusks clicked as he struggled for words, though none came. For all his strength, all his battle-hardened experience, the warlord found himself unable to face this threat, because for once, brute force meant nothing. The Vorthan judge finally broke the silence, their crystalline voice pulsing like a distant star. "You said the device is linked to you." They said, every word deliberate. "If that's true, then you alone control it. What assurance do we have that you won't use it against us?" Eliot's gaze didn't waver. "That depends," he replied softly. "Are you planning to give me a reason to?" The question hung in the air like a blade. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. The gathered inventors and warlords, the engineers and scientists, beings who had built fleets that could shatter moons and weapons capable of rewriting reality, now stood helpless before a teenager and his invention. The HFY technician, her delicate limbs trembling slightly, took a cautious step forward. This can't be the extent of it," she stammered. "A device like this, a nullifier of function, can't just be a prototype. No species starts with something this sophisticated." She swallowed hard. "How much more have you built?" Eliot's lips twitched into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Enough." The word was simple, but the weight behind it was devastating. The Karthok warlord's patience finally snapped. His voice, rough as a landslide, roared through the chamber. "You expect us to believe that humanity has more of these? More of these abominations? You're bluffing." Eliot's calm didn't falter. "Am I?" The warlord's tusks clicked again, but his anger faltered. Because the truth was, they didn't know. No one in the room knew how deep humanity's ingenuity ran. For so long, the galaxy had dismissed Earth as a young, reckless species, too emotional and unpredictable to be a serious threat. They were considered curious, even charming in their chaotic way, but never dangerous. That illusion was gone now. The Vorthan judge's voice, though steady, carried a thin thread of uncertainty. "What do you want, human?" Eliot's smile was faint, but it carried the weight of every human who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or overlooked. "Then you'll have to hope we're still the most dangerous minds in the galaxy." The HFY technician's voice cracked. "And if you aren't?" For the first time, Eliot's expression hardened. His gaze, once calm, now burned with something deeper, something raw. "Then you'll wish you'd treated us with more respect." The word struck harder than any explosion. The Vorthan judge's crystalline form flickered, a soft hum emanating from within. You truly believe this is the only way to earn respect?" Eliot's jaw tightened. "We didn't want it to be. But you never listened, not until we gave you a reason to. And that was the cruel truth of it. Humanity hadn't built this device to conquer, to destroy, or to control. They built it because it was the only language the galaxy seemed to understand. Strength. For all the talk of enlightenment and technological superiority, the galaxy's oldest species still only paid attention when something scared them. And now, they were terrified. The sphere continued its steady hum. A sound now burned into the minds of everyone in the chamber. A sound they would hear in their nightmares for years to come. Because the humans hadn't just shown their strength. They had shown their resolve. And for the first time in galactic history, the universe realized that Earth's children weren't children at all. They were the ones holding the leash. It wasn't a demand, it was a plea. Eliot let the question linger, his hand hovering just inches from the device's switch. "I want you to remember," he said softly. "I want you to remember that the species you mocked, the ones you called children, we built this." His fingers lightly brushed the sphere's surface, and for a split second, that eerie ripple flared again, of distortion in the air, as though the fabric of reality itself was bending around the device. He continued, his voice steady. "You think this is a weapon, but it's not. It's a reminder." The crowd stiffened. "A reminder," Eliot said, "that humans don't just build machines. We build ideas." His gaze swept across the room, landing on the Karthok warlord, the Childish engineer, the Vorthan judge. "And ideas are far more dangerous than weapons." Another ripple of silence. The Childish engineer's glow dimmed even further. "But what happens if this idea falls into the wrong hands?" The room no longer felt like a gathering of the galaxy's most brilliant minds. It felt like a battlefield without weapons. Every inventor, warlord, and scientist stood paralyzed, as though any sudden movement might awaken the device further. The sphere remained unchanged, small, silent except for its faint, steady hum. But it no longer needed to do anything. Its presence alone had already carved itself into the minds of everyone present. Eliot hadn't moved. His hand rested inches from the device, but the tension in the air made it seem as though he was gripping the throat of the entire room. His calmness was no longer seen as arrogance. It was control, and the galaxy's most powerful beings had no idea how to take it back. The Vorthan Judge, their crystalline form flickering with a faint pulse of fractured light, spoke first. "We need to understand," they said, voice steady but thin. "How far this technology has spread. Is this the only prototype, or have you humans already integrated this design into your fleets?" The Karthok warlord let out a low guttural growl. "If they've deployed these nullifiers across their military," he said, "then the balance of power in this galaxy is broken." His tusks clicked together with a harsh snap. "All of our defenses, ships, weapons, planetary grids, they'd be useless." The warlord wasn't asking anymore. He was afraid. Eliot didn't blink. His voice, soft but unyielding, sliced through the rising panic. "We haven't deployed them," he said. "Not yet." "Not yet," the Sci-Fi engineer repeated in a whisper, her bioluminescent glow flickering dimmer with every passing second. "You mean you could?" Eliot's gaze didn't soften. "If we needed to." The Karthok warlord's massive fist slammed onto the table, the sound echoing through the chamber like a gunshot. "This is insanity," he roared. "You're children playing with forces you don't understand. This device, it doesn't just disable technology. It unmakes it. It erases purpose itself." His voice darkened. "What happens when you lose control of it?" Eliot's expression didn't shift, but his next words carried a cold weight. "We won't." The room fell into another stunned silence. The HFY technician, still trembling, finally dared to ask the question that everyone was thinking. "How?" she rasped. "How can you be so sure? No species has ever created a system like this without unforeseen consequences." Eliot's fingers hovered over the black sphere, but he didn't touch it. His voice, still calm, still soft, answered with quiet finality. "Because we built something even more dangerous first." The words sent a ripple of horror through the room. The Sci-Fi engineer took a step back, her glow nearly gone. What do you mean?" Eliot met her gaze, his expression as cold as the vacuum of space. "This isn't the first invention we made to challenge the galaxy's power." He tilted his head slightly, his voice gaining a sharper edge. "This is just the safest one." The Karthok warlord's tusks parted in disbelief. "This is the safest." Eliot nodded slowly. "We had to create something worse first, something unstable, before we understood how to build the nullifier." His fingers tapped lightly against the surface of the sphere, causing that eerie ripple in the air once more. "This device erases function, but the first prototype." His voice trailed off for a heartbeat. "It didn't stop at technology." The Vorthan Judge's light pulsed violently. "Explain." Eliot's eyes darkened. "The first prototype didn't just erase a machine's purpose. It targeted concepts, ideas, anything with structure, whether it was circuitry or thought, began to unravel." He spoke with quiet intensity. "We shut it down before it went too far, but in those few seconds, we realized something." No one dared to interrupt him. He continued. "It didn't just erase the function of weapons. It started erasing intent. We watched a combat eye, one designed to target and destroy. Suddenly, forget why it existed." His voice lowered. "Then, it started affecting the engineers who programmed it." The Sci-Fi engineer's glowing skin flickered erratically. "It turned on your minds." Eliot's jaw tightened. It began dissolving the concept of hostility, not through empathy, but by eroding the very idea of aggression. The scientists monitoring it started losing focus. Their purpose, their drive, started slipping away. The Karthok warlord's voice was a rough whisper now. You built something that unmade thought itself. Eliot nodded once. The room seemed colder. The HFY technician looked like she might collapse. And you stopped it. Verily. Eliot's voice was calm, but the memory in his eyes spoke of a chaos none of them could imagine. We realized it was too dangerous, not just for our enemies, but for us. It didn't just neutralize technology. It threatened to unravel our minds, our very will. His hand hovered over the current device. So we built this, something safer. It only erases purpose in machines, not ideas. His gaze hardened. But the blueprint for the first prototype still exists. The Vorthan judge's flickering grew erratic. Why? Why would you keep the blueprint? Eliot's voice was cold steel. Because the galaxy doesn't listen to words. No one spoke. He let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of his statement to crash over them like a tidal wave. You mocked us, Eliot said softly. You laughed at humanity, at our inventions, at our science, at our youth. You only stopped when you realized we had built something that could unmake your weapons. His voice sharpened. But we didn't build these devices because we wanted to. We built them because we knew you'd never take us seriously until we gave you a reason to fear us. The Karthok warlord's jaw clenched, his rage now drowned beneath a wave of something far deeper. Terror. Eliot's next words were calm, but they cut deeper than any weapon. We never wanted to be the most dangerous species in the galaxy, he said softly. But you didn't give us a choice. The sphere's hum seemed louder now, though the sound itself hadn't changed. It was a steady reminder of what humanity had created, and what they still held back. And for the first time, the galaxy understood. Humanity hadn't simply caught up. They had built something the universe had never seen. And worse, something it could never control. The room felt heavier now, not because of the device itself, but because of the unbearable silence that followed Eliot's words. The black sphere continued its steady, almost soothing hum. A soft sound, yet it felt like the distant roar of an avalanche, a promise of destruction hiding beneath the surface. No one dared to speak, as if even a whisper might awaken something far worse than the nullifier resting on the table. Eliot didn't move. He stood beside the device like a statue, his calm gaze unwavering, his hand still hovering just above its smooth surface. It wasn't a threat, not overtly. But the meaning was clear. One wrong word, one wrong move, and he could remind them all just how fragile their technology, their entire way of life, truly was. The Vorthan judge's crystalline form flickered with sharp pulses of light, a physical manifestation of their inner turmoil. Their once condescending tone was gone, replaced by something far more cautious. Human, they said slowly, carefully choosing each word. You speak of restraint. Yet you stand before us with a weapon that could dismantle the foundations of every fleet, every defense system in the galaxy. This is not the act of a species seeking peace. Eliot's eyes didn't soften. It's not a weapon, he replied quietly. It's a warning. The Karthok warlord's tusks clicked together, but the fury in his gaze had been replaced by something more dangerous. Fear disguised as anger. A warning? His voice was rough, but it no longer carried the same weight it had earlier. You expect us to believe this is about peace. He stepped forward, massive shoulders tense. You built something that can unmake our defenses, and you say it's a warning. Eliot met his gaze without flinching. Yes. The warlord's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. The HFY technician, still standing near the back of the room, spoke with a voice barely above a whisper. Why? Why build something like this if you didn't plan to use it? Eliot's hand slowly withdrew from the sphere, though the humming sound didn't change. He turned his gaze to the HFY, his voice quiet but firm. Because you never listened to us when we asked for peace. You only started paying attention when we showed you something that scared you. His jaw tightened slightly. We didn't build this because we wanted to conquer. We built it because we were tired of being laughed at. The room's collective silence cracked like glass. The Sci-Fi engineer's glow flickered weakly. You mean this? She gestured to the device. Exists because we underestimated you. Eliot's voice hardened. It exists because you refuse to see us as equals. The words struck harder than any explosion. For centuries, humanity had been the galaxy's oddity. Too emotional, too reckless, too unpredictable to be considered a serious power. They were the loud newcomers, the curious explorers, the eager children at the table of giants. The older species had smiled at their enthusiasm, chuckled at their primitive technologies, and patted them on the head like a pet that had learned a new trick. But now, they were staring at a human invention that could strip their warships of purpose, silence their planetary defense grids, and unmake the very concept of technological warfare. And it wasn't even the most dangerous thing humans had built. The Karthok warlord's voice was quieter this time, still rough, but lacking its previous rage. And what happens now? Eliot tilted his head slightly. That depends. On what? His gaze swept across the room. At the warlord, the judge, the scientists and engineers. On whether you still think we're children. The words struck deeper than any weapon could have. The Vorthan judge's crystalline light pulsed slowly. Human. Eliot, we understand now that we misjudged your people. The judge's voice faltered for the first time, no longer speaking from a place of superiority, but of uncertainty. But this device, it's more than a warning. It's a shift in power. Eliot's expression didn't change. Then maybe it's time the balance shifted. The Sci-Fi engineer's glow dimmed further. You want us to fear you. Eliot's voice was soft but unyielding. We want you to respect us. The Karthok warlord's massive frame seemed smaller now, as though the weight of his own insignificance had finally caught up with him. And if we don't? Eliot's gaze didn't flinch. Then you'll meet the first prototype. The warlord's breathing grew heavier, his mind clearly racing through the implications. They all understood now. The nullifier wasn't just a creation. It was a message, a warning, a promise. Finally, the Vorthan judge spoke again, their voice subdued. What do you want, human? Eliot's hand rested by his side, no longer near the device. I want you to remember this moment, he said softly. I want you to remember how it feels to be helpless, to realize that the species you mocked, the ones you thought were beneath you, built something you couldn't control. His voice sharpened. Because the next time we stand in a room like this, we won't be asking for respect. We'll be demanding it. The silence that followed was the loudest it had ever been. The sphere's steady hum seemed louder now, echoing through the room like the distant thunder of an approaching storm. The galaxy's most powerful beings no longer saw humans as reckless explorers or naive dreamers. They saw them for what they truly were, builders of ideas, wielders of concepts far more dangerous than mere weapons. And for the first time, the galaxy understood. Humanity didn't need to conquer planets. They only needed to remind the universe what happened when you underestimated them.